Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Hi, I'm Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have another great guest. I have another great author, which I always love, and her name is Jennifer Hyland. She has had a 26-year career as a law enforcement professional up in the great country of Canada in the British Columbia area. I understand she's worked for 6 different police agencies. I'm sure we'll hear about that. But now that she is retired, she is the author of Tightrope, where she offers a rare and unflinching look behind the badge, and we're going to dig into that. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Ken.
Now, are we good friends enough where I could just call you Jen, or do I have to go the whole Jennifer?
Jen is perfect. Yeah.
Okay, good. Just too many syllables. Jen works. So, as often happens, we dig into so much cool stuff before I even press record. You mentioned, a really interesting and deep career in law enforcement. You work for a number of agencies in British Columbia. Tell us a little bit about that 26-year career.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I actually didn't work for 6 different agencies. I worked for 3 different police agencies, but my career started in the late 90s, and it was just by sort of happenstance. I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I had graduated from university with a degree and thought I was going to go to law school, and took the LSAT twice and didn't feel like I'd gotten a good enough score. So I was kind of one of these meandering 26, 27-year somethings traveling through Europe. And I happened upon a friend of mine, and he had gotten into policing with the federal police in Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he talked about it with so much passion, the nature of doing an investigation, the nature of helping people, just being out in the community. And policing had never dawned on me. And I didn't want to do the RCMP at that time because you had to agree to be posted anywhere in the country. So they could pick you up and move you across to the other side of the country, away from your family and friends. And I didn't really want to do that. I loved my province and wanted to stay where I was at. So in the late 90s, I applied to New West Police, which is kind of located right in the middle of the Lower Mainland, just, 15, 20 minutes outside of Vancouver, and went through police training like everybody else, and then just started my career like every new recruit, very wide-eyed and bushy-tailed kind of thing. And right after training, just kind of started to really get a sense that policing entailed a lot more than I thought it was going to, a lot more than what you're exposed to in training. And that was the start of the 26-year career where I realized nothing was straightforward, no matter how much service I had, no matter where I ultimately met my husband in New West and decided I didn't want to work with him. And that was my first move to the RCMP.
I love you, but I don't want to work with you.
Yeah. Which is interesting because my story, and I know we'll talk a little bit about Tightrope, is I've had a long experience as being a police officer and a female police officer, but I shared that experience with also being a spouse of a police officer. So being married to a police officer who had his own careers and his own traumas and things that I had to learn to navigate as a wife and a co-parent. I mean, we're still married, but like parenting our kids together and what that was like. So I left my first organization specifically because of that reason, and then moved to the federal police force, the RCMP. And that's where I moved from several different communities, because as you're promoted up the ranks, they'll take you from one community, promote you, and move you into the next community. And so that was the bulk of my 20 years of policing, 4 years or so in New West, and then 20 in the RCMP. And then at the end of my career, after I reached chief of police in the RCMP, I decided to leave the RCMP to do the startup police department from scratch, which was Surrey Police Service. in Canada, it's one of the first times we decided to take an organization that needed to be about 1,000 police officers strong and build it from scratch because it was taking over. The RCMP were leaving the community and they needed to build their brand new police department. And I was the first deputy hired, and my job was to find all the police officers and all the staff to hire to build that police
Sure.
organization. So the 26 years kind of follows through just about every kind of experience and story you could imagine in that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're the first person I can remember, and I've been, I think, you're somewhere around the 160th episode of this, and this is, the not the first law enforcement first responder podcast I've done. I think you're the first person that I've ever talked to that has actually started a police department or a police force strictly from scratch. That usually doesn't happen in the United States.
It actually doesn't happen in Canada. In fact, when I went looking for research as to who had done it, it'd been done years ago in Ireland. There was a few collapsed police organizations in Ireland, and they had to build a new one kind of from scratch, but there was really no playbook for it, which is what was exciting and also extremely challenging.
Hmm.
There was no one who'd done it before to figure out exactly what the steps were supposed to be. So
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. It's we've done some work down here. A great organization called How to Love Our Cops out of the Northern California area, and their whole probably not going. I'm going to paraphrase it. Probably not going to do it complete justice, but they're all about the law enforcement family of especially in the traditional household. It's not always like that. Sometimes the female is the police officer and the husband has a civilian type of job. But they talk about a lot of the challenges of being a spouse of a police officer. And we've had a few folks on here where, both the husband and wife were in law enforcement. And yeah, that has a dynamic of, okay, you understand because you're doing the same or a very similar job, but the challenges of being a spouse of a police officer doesn't change. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you would think that two police officers would be able to kind of share things a little bit better, but I would think too, sometimes you want to keep things close to the vest.
yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mean, anybody who's married to or in a relationship or related to a police officer at a certain point in time, once they go through their career, there'll be these like quiet moments where police officers are exposed to a very abnormal level of critical incidents and trauma, like something like the average human being in their life will have one critical incident that they happen upon
Mm-hmm.
or see. That's the research. Police officers will have over 1,000. And
Yep.
so that exposure has to go somewhere. And while family members and spouses would love that to be sitting down at the kitchen table or sitting in the living room, when the kids have gone to bed and just talking about their day and processing it because the family member legitimately wants to hear and share part of that journey. But the police officer, the last thing want to do when they've got, 15 more traumatic incidents layered on top is often to talk about and relive it one more time. And so family members who, might have really had a certain relationship with their spouse or their brother or their sibling or their child will find them. I call it like those quiet moments where everybody is having a conversation and engaged in a talk about a sports team or an event or a family event, and they'll look over and their loved one who's involved in law enforcement or a first responder is just kind of like sitting quiet on their own. And it's not necessarily that it's an unhealthy moment, but it's just an opportunity for them to kind of like like try to regulate themselves again, just try to
Mm-hmm.
decompress, not have to talk about the things that are gone through their mind, to hear normal conversations and let the normalcy kind of like soak through them. Without the pressure of trying to explain, oh, no, work was great. I had to talk to a family who lost a child in a car accident. They don't want to do that. So I guess what I would say was fortunate for me being married to a spouse is when we needed those quiet moments, I didn't feel like I needed to know what had gone on in
Yeah.
his day. I'm like, I get you, you get me. We're going to have there are downtime in a way that when we really need to start having conversations again, we will. And it's not that we didn't talk about what each of us had going on at work, but it was just done in a way where we didn't necessarily have to relive the trauma of it. We were able to have the conversation in a way where we would instantly get what was going on without
Hmm.
having to talk about the detail. And that's what's really helpful when sometimes two people in first responder world are married. It can
Hmm.
also be what results. They have a we actually are in a profession that's a very high incidence of divorce.
Yeah.
Because if you don't figure out how to do that with your spouse, then the marriage or the relationship with your loved one becomes very feeling distant, cut off, like you don't let me into that part of your life. And there's this sense of almost betrayal that you don't trust me enough to tell me the things. And so in our marriage, it was easy. Those things were easier than what a lot of other maybe people who are not exposed or understanding what the world is like have different struggles to go through that we didn't have.
And now a word from our sponsor, Police Mortgage.
As a first responder, control isn't optional. It's how you do your job. But when it comes to buying or refinancing a home, most lenders don't get your world. Police Mortgage does. They specialize in working with first responders, walking you through the process, breaking down your options, and helping you lock in competitive rates without the runaround. Take control of your financial future with people who have your back. Visit policemortgage.com or call 312-499-8878. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none.
And learn more about Police Mortgage from their podcast, The Mortgage Beat, another podcast in the National Police Podcast Network.
Yeah, and just for my audience's edification, because not everybody gets to go to British Columbia, Canada. It's not Brainerd, Minnesota, where there's like 10 people and a few trees. I mean, there's parts of that certainly in British Columbia, but it's a big metropolitan area. Vancouver is a very big city, with riots when you don't win the Stanley Cup. And yeah, Victoria, which I've also been to, is a big city. So there's real crime, there's real issues there.
Yeah, there's millions of people that live in the area that I've policed. So yeah, where it's there's lots of people, there's lots of police, and there's lots of crime. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you maybe have dealt with things like, drugs and
Oh, yeah,
homicides.
100%. I think the story that everybody likes me, and I talk about this a little bit in the
Oh,
book,
cool. Yeah, go into I love
the
stories.
the serial. So I ended up having an experience with Canada's worst serial killers. So we had
Mm-hmm.
a serial killer in the 90s named Robert Pickton, and he was murdering sex trade workers. He's believed to murder about 49, and he would kill them and then he would feed them to his pigs on his pig farm. And in the 90s, this is one of the things that I picked up in policing, as much as I loved guns and drugs and some of the other, files that the guys did, I did
Hmm.
notice that one of the things I brought as a female to the team in the 90s was that I wasn't uncomfortable doing, child sexual abuse cases and domestic
Hmm.
violence cases and dealing with sex trade workers. It was something that I thought there's a gap there and I'm comfortable filling it. And so it was,
Sure.
you're able to kind of show that the diversity that we all bring is very helpful when it comes to the community. 50% of the issues have to do with females as either victims or witnesses or something. So, anyways, I ended up getting quite a few fairly strong relationships. I guess you could call them informants at times with sex trade workers, and that's
Hmm.
resulted in me happening upon Robert Pickton, the serial killer, showing up in New West and actually trying to coax a series of sex trade workers into his car. And I didn't know he was a serial killer at the time. Nobody did. But I stopped him from picking up some girls that night and got
Hmm.
in a bit of an argument with him on the street. I posted about this a while ago. He referred to me as a blonde bitch cop,
Hmm.
and then never came back to New West. And then years later, when he was finally, uh, basically they
Apprehended.
apprehended, they'd done a
Yeah.
search warrant on his farm and they found ID of missing women and body parts. And it's pretty graphic. The story of what he did it's pretty gross. But I had to go to court and give evidence because way back in the 90s, nobody had evidence of him stopping anyone on the street and actually trying to lure women in,
Mm-hmm.
other than my file where I had stopped him and I had taken notes about it. So I ended up being like, the 96th witness in this murder trial that was about, basically the worst serial killer in Canada, murdering 49 women. And it was just like one of those things that at the time it didn't really seem like that big of a deal. He's a creepy guy. He was gross. I was writing about him in my notes. And then years later, you realize like that one moment of me bothering to care for sex trade workers and pay attention to what was going on turned out to be the moment that the Crown was able to show a date of a murder and have a witness that could
Mm-hmm.
put him in a location of where the victims came from. And at the moment that you're having it seems like this inconsequential thing. And then six,
Yeah.
7 years later, it's like this really big deal, this 10-minute experience turns out to be something really important. And that's what policing is like. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this happenstance moments can change people's lives for better or for worse. And sometimes you don't even realize it's happening when you're actually in the moment with them.
Yeah, as my audience knows, I've never been a cop. I've never been a first responder, but I've obviously talked to hundreds, thousands of them, and I'm friendly with a lot of our local police here in Long Beach, California, and that's exactly what they say. In terms of like we have a camera program here, or the city, which is I think while I have some issues with the city, I'll give them a bunch of kudos for this is that they have a program where they'll pay for part or all of your camera on your house if it shows a street, an intersection, something that they could use later on. And I had a commander say, it may seem innocuous to you that, this, 2017 Buick, happened to stop at your block for 2 seconds and then leave. But that might be the one piece where we say, all right, we know that that Buick was here at 9:52 a.m. and the crime with the Buick happened at 10:07 and it was over here, so we could see the progression. So those little things, actually do make a case and are important.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really great example. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So while I've never been a police officer, I am an author. I've written a book, nothing about law enforcement. It was about business. But yeah, I kind of understand because I want to get into Tightrope, and the motivation is I've talked to tons of authors, and generally you don't wake up one morning and say, I got nothing to do today. I'm gonna write a book. And what you also don't do, at least I didn't do, say, you know what? I'm gonna write a book and I'm gonna become a millionaire. You
No.
usually have, and this was my motivation is, I got something to say and I want to write it for me, even if only, one person buys it and I'm the one person, I want to get this out on paper. I want to go through this process for whatever it means in my mind and in my heart. So Tightrope has come out recently. Tell us a little bit about the motivation of putting that thing together.
Yeah, it's a really good lead up the way you describe it.
Well,
Um,
I've done this before. I'm
Totally.
good at this. I ask questions, I lead up. It's a talent. What can I
It's
say?
perfect. Um, I would like, so ever since I was little, and I would call myself a very thoughtful, introspective person in general. So from the time I was little, I always journaled. And what I loved about journaling was I could be truly honest about what I thought about either friends and family, people around me, something going on at work. And it was a place to be able to sort of truth telling, get out my thoughts that maybe during the interaction things were in my head, but of course you would never say or do them. And it was this way of journaling. I always enjoyed writing. So as I started progressing through my policing career, I would write down important experiences when they happened to me, and sometimes like never really tell anybody, but just write them down. Um, so fast forward, I become the chief of police of my hometown. It's about 130 police officers and 50 civilian staff. It was just over 100,000 people in the town. I was the RCMP, so I was the commander of the community detachment. And I ended up getting sick and being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And because I was the chief of police and it was a busy time, we were leading up to summer, and I needed to go to the hospital and get some treatment when I was diagnosed. And I could not bring myself to be dishonest and lie to my team about why I was going to be gone for a few weeks. And felt compelled to just tell them the truth. And so that's what I did. I told my team in person, a small group, and then I sent out an email to all my staff, about 200 people, letting them know that I'd been diagnosed with MS and that I was sick. I was going to be making my way back to work, but that I was needing to go off work for a couple of weeks, and just wanted their understanding as to why their leader was kind of like leaving during a busy time of the year. And what I got back, it wasn't all the messages of support that made me think I need to be writing or more open about stuff. It was when so many people sent me messages saying, thank you for having the courage to tell us that you are struggling, that you're a human, that you have challenges, and that you trusted us enough with your story to tell us what was going on. And I remember being so impacted by that, thinking, as leaders, as police officers, we walk around and pretend like nothing to see here, don't let them see you sweat. I can solve everything. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a cop, I'm the leader. I got all of this. And I thought, what an unfair standard we project
Mhm.
to the human beings around us that are looking to us for our leadership. And it was after that that I started really more manuscript writing, like the idea that there'll come a point in time where I think there is value in being honest about the trials and tribulations of what it's like to have this life, and that the people who are out there also having what I know are the same issues. It might not be EMS, but it'll be something else. It might not be bullying and harassment at work. It might be gaslighting. It might be in policing. It might be that you're working in a hospital or some other business. But I started to understand that we were much more the same than different. And I didn't want to write a book that was just about, here's a cop story, here's a file I did, and this is how I caught the bad guy. I wanted to talk about all the things that we seemed ashamed and scared to talk about. And I wanted to be able to put that out there so that people didn't feel like they were the only ones that was struggling, because that's the feedback I'd gotten when I finally had the courage to tell my struggle. I realized what a shame it was that we're often ashamed to be honest about stuff. And so that
Mhm.
became the motivation for Tightrope. And of course, while I was in policing, it wouldn't have been appropriate to write the type of book that I've written, really talking about some of this stuff. And so it needed to wait till I retired, in order to write the kind of book that I really wanted to put out there. And so that's why Tightrope exists.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
Sorry, I probably should have
No, no,
paused.
no, no. It was great. As we'll put this on air. I don't think I've ever put this on air. It's like, as all of us podcasters, we love when our guests go into in depth. We could always cut things later on. But when you ask a question and your guest says, "Yeah," not much you could do with that. So I appreciate the depth. I sincerely appreciate the depth that you went into. And yeah, it reminds me, yeah, as a civilian that supports law enforcement, what I found over the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years, while there's still some ignorance, although that's changed quite a bit, at least as an outsider, where there isn't as much, okay, yeah, you shot a perp, have a beer and let's get back to work type of thing. There's a little bit of understanding on that. But when it's an obvious legitimate issue, an obvious legitimate challenge for an officer, and with you, it's multiple sclerosis. With another officer that I'm thinking of, we did a whole podcast on it, Facing Evil. Whose partner basically got executed right in front of him. Yeah,
Mm.
the department and almost everybody in law enforcement and around him rallied around him. They get it. Even for policing to see your partner get killed in front of you is not a usual act. So I find that, when you're vulnerable on an obvious challenge, that the law enforcement community really does rally around you. Is that a good observation, or am I just crazy, or both?
No, it's actually a fantastic observation because I talk about the silent scars. When somebody's injured at work because they've been in a car accident or, they've broken an arm or a leg in a fight or twisted a knee, you see the cast, you see the bandage. So okay, well, this person needs to have a certain kind of reduced work type and recovery. There's treatment, doctors are involved. It becomes very obvious for the physical injuries. And then there are the very, very obvious traumatic injuries. So I talk about in the book about my husband being shot when Paul was shot on duty. But this is, you're talking many years ago. He went back to work 4 days after being shot. He wasn't physically injured because the bulletproof vest basically saved his life. If
Mm,
he'd been shot 4 inches higher, it would have
hmm.
hit him in the head. If he'd been shot a little bit lower, it would have hit him in the gut.
Yeah.
And my kids might not be here today if that was the case. And so the thing with the silent injuries and the majority of people who suffer trauma and PTSD and really soul changing, life changing experiences are not those really big ones that you're talking about because those are actually relatively rare. It
Hmm.
is like the slow drip into a cup. It's you went and a young person or a family member committed suicide and you were there and you had to take the body down with the fire department and hear the screams of the family member and tell people. Then you have to go to a car accident and it's like a glass of water and there's these slow drips of things that we just our day-to-day policing work, and then you have a fight with your boss and you don't get a promotion, and then you have a family issue at home. And majority of people who are suffering from long-term trauma, stress, and suffering, dark place experiences come from the accumulation of all of those small things. And the reason why it's really sad is the final thing that hits the cup before the cup floweth over
Hmm.
is often something where people will be like, well, what's the big deal about that file? Like, we do
Yeah.
those files thousands of times. Yes, you do. And on that day, your police officer had one file too many, and it's not about the one what you think is a minor file. It's 10, 15, 20 years of that
Yeah.
happening. And so, while absolutely we're really good at rallying around the real traumatic officer involved shooting, dead officer, as we should be, we have not figured out how to dissect that when somebody goes off road right, it's
Hmm.
it is often never about the one file that
Hmm.
triggered that. And we're not really great at that yet.
Yeah, and well, that's not only law enforcement, that's society. And I kind of don't want to get into a dumbass story of my own too much, but my audience, knows full well that I'm an alcoholic in recovery, a little over 6 years sober, and about, I want to say, three and a half years ago, was going through a little bit of a rough time. I was in recovery, things were going well. However, there were about three, four, five unfortunate little things that all went wrong. And, you kind of, maybe erroneously, you get this feeling as an alcoholic in recovery. It's like, all right, well, I'm doing the right thing. I'm not drinking anymore. Good things should happen. Bad things shouldn't happen to me because, hey, look at what I'm doing. And it was a day where a postal worker, happened to run into our brand new parked car on the street to total it, because, dumbass doesn't know how to make a left turn. And, there was no physical violence, but verbally I lit into this guy. And to where, I have neighbors that still won't talk to me today, and this was 3 years ago. It's like, well, it was just a car. And it's like, well, maybe that was just a car, but that was a culmination of about five or six things that happened. If it was just that thing, maybe I would have reacted a little bit differently. But in my mind, and maybe it was erroneous, but in my mind, that was like the nth thing that happened that had me go off the rails and almost start drinking again. And nobody really realized that. Fortunately, after talking to my wife a little bit and explaining to what was going on in my mind, it's just, yeah, I could see how that would be that straw, on
Mhm.
the camel's back, was a more of, a freaking boulder or a big piece of lumber than a straw. But my point is that's not just law enforcement.
Right.
I think we're all ignorant as to what people are really dealing with, and we deal with some kind of we deal with the surface level stuff because it's easy, and also because we don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant way to kind of connect that at the end of the day, the police officers that put on the uniform and go to work, they are your neighbors, your spouses, your brothers, your sisters, and you said that a lot of your viewership are like family members and spouses. And
Mm,
so the reality of it is sometimes when we see complaints and there's no excuse for police officer corruption, bad behavior, use of force,
hmm.
all those kinds of things. They have to be kept in check and people have to be held accountable. But it's always more complicated than the thing that happened at the end, the talking back to somebody or bad behavior. If you peel back the layers and you back up, like sort of, I always say it's like watching a movie. If the end thing is the bad behavior or the trauma or the kind of blowing up about something, I always encourage family members or friends or people who are witnessing their loved one go through something. It's almost like rewind
Hmm.
the movie and be like, okay, what happened in the lead up to this moment? What happened yesterday? What's been going on? And then you have like this better sort of understanding, when you're watching a movie and you watch the character all of a sudden just lose it in a scene, but you've been watching the movie and you're
Right.
like, oh yeah, this we can totally tell this person's going to explode. In real life, people are like, oh well, that just kind of explosion came out of nowhere. Nothing comes out of nowhere,
Right.
right? There's always something. And I guess that's a little bit of why I wanted to write Tightrope too, is like we're all just humans trying to figure out the human experience. I
Hmm.
wanted to be really honest about what it's like in law enforcement, just because there's often this sense that they're better people or they're expected to be better people or they're superhuman or they come with some kind of ability to cope with life better than others. And the reality of it is nobody really knows when you get into policing whether you're going to cope or not, because
Hmm.
until you're doing the job, you have no idea what it feels like to have this kind of exposure or whether or not you have the skills to actually get through it. And part of my experience in policing was some of these really important things we didn't do a very good job of talking about. And so the people who were going through them just felt really ashamed, like they should be better than they are. They should have been better skilled at doing some of what it is that they were confronted with. And I just thought, what a shame it is to pretend like we're better than that. And Tightrope was just to sort of let people know that the struggles are real and it's okay. And you and I talked at the before we hit record about
Hmm.
social media and how you can go on social media and think, wow, like look how amazing that person's life is, and they're so put together, and they got this happy family, and
Hmm.
everyone's smiling, and they're on a trip together. And the reality of it is, social media has made us feel very self-conscious because we compare ourselves to a very fake life of
Hmm.
people on the other end. And I wrote Tightrope because I wanted people to really know really what I was about, not some kind of fake, prettied up version of what it was like to go through it, but just like a very
Hmm.
legitimate experience that first responder or not, people find it resonates and they relate to what I've talked about in the book.
Yeah. So for those folks that are gonna run out and buy Tightrope, I know you can find it on Amazon because I found it on Amazon, or wherever it is that you can find Tightrope. For those that are gonna run out and purchase Tightrope, I know you've got an audio version that'll come out at some point in the future. Whether
It's
they
out now. It came out Thursday. So the
ah
audio version is in the world. Yes.
So whether you watch or whether you read or listen to Tightrope, what do you want those folks that consume your book to really feel, think about? What is the takeaway?
I think the takeaway, as much as I started writing it because I wanted people to kind of have an understanding of what it was like to be a first responder, the first people that connected with me privately after reading the book were actually not first responders at all. And listening to them talk to me about how Tightrope resonated, which was really in its core what I wanted, which is that like nobody is alone in this world. No one is going through this experience by themselves. And whether it's first responding or marriage or relationship to a first responder or work in general or life in general, the book just talks about very human experiences that are often very shameful and difficult for people to go through. And I wanted people to know that they are not the only one, that it's not just them, um, and that we are much more similar than we are different from each other. And when people read it and tell me that they felt like I was writing about them personally,
Hmm.
that is not that I'm some great writer. I'm just telling very relevant, connected stories that a lot of us go through, and people see themselves in it. And that for me is the beauty of Tightrope.
Nice, nice. And I didn't mean to skate by it the MS part of your life. So I'll ask a very poignant question. How are you doing?
Thank you for asking. There's a whole chapter in the book about my MS journey. I was unfortunately misdiagnosed earlier on in my life and career where I probably could have been on treatment that would have prevented me developing more lesions and
Hmm.
becoming sick the way I was. So, the medical system's not perfect. And when I was eventually diagnosed, I say this, it's really hard for me to say that I regret or I'm upset about having MS because being diagnosed with MS really changed who I was as a person. I became a better parent. I became a better leader. I became a better spouse. I was healthier. I was much more compassionate to all the people around me. I recognized struggles of things like drug and alcohol abuse. I wasn't judgmental about what anyone else's struggle, whether it
Hmm.
was mental or medical or physical or whatever it was. Being in that experience uh, made me a better person. And so it's really hard for me to be, it's not like I'm glad I have MS,
Right.
but I always say everybody gets something, and so my disability, my diagnosis is something I was able to get treatment for to slow down the progression of my MS. I have what's called the good MS, relapsing remitting. You'll see people like Christina Applegate and other
Hmm.
people that are more famous. They get a type of MS that's called progressive, and so you very quickly see them walking with mobility assistance, and sometimes
Hmm.
their voices, they sound like they're slurring their words. And all MS patients get there eventually. I'm 55 and I'm doing very well. The decision to leave, I never wanted to stop being a police officer when I stopped. And it's a little bit poignant in the book because my last day as a police officer, I didn't know was going to be my last day. But if I were to look back on my life and talk about a moment where I became a better person, just in general, it probably was the moment I was diagnosed with MS. So I'm healthy now. I'm very mindful of my health. And maybe I'll live longer because of my diagnosis than if I'd have carried on the very unhealthy way of being that I was living before I found out I had MS.
Hmm. That's interesting that you would say that because of the diagnosis, you might live longer than you would have without it because of some of the things that you're doing health wise.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never know, but
Right.
I can tell you I was living a very unhealthy life prior to my diagnosis.
A lot of poutine.
Yeah, just not a
I love
lot
poutine.
of not a rest or sleep. And yeah, the diet is very important. So yeah, we'll never know, but I'm healthier now than I was before. Yeah.
Yeah, after my last cholesterol test, I think my doctor will tell me never have poutine again. So as we begin to wrap up, one of the positive things that I want to and will kind of begin to end this conversation with is as I speak to you on recording, as I've spoken to you off of recording. What's become very clear to me, and rightfully so, is you're very proud of your law enforcement career. You're proud of what you accomplished. You're proud of the career that you chose. You're proud of what you were able to do. Is there one part looking back at your police career where you said, yeah, this is the thing that I'm most proud of? I'm really, really pleased and happy with
Oh,
myself. Yeah, see, I say don't throw curveballs, but there you go.
oh,
There's the curveball. Wasn't on the starter questions.
you know, many different moments that it's really hard to say. I would say that the work that I did to protect children,
Mm,
um, making sure that sometimes we didn't get criminal charges with people, but we could force offenders away from vulnerable kids in
mm,
family court and other means. And there was a series of files in general where I'd heard from um, children themselves and their family members and parents of kids that they see me as the person that saved their child and saved their family. And I remember getting some gifts from this one particular family. I talk about the file in the book a bit. And I remember thinking when I was reading, the little girl had written me a note and drawn me a picture. And I remember thinking, if that is all I ever do, I think I was a sergeant at the time. And I remember going home and having this vivid experience of like, if that is the only thing I ever do in this job, I literally feel like I have saved the life of a child. Like
hmm
it, and so I would say if you say the one thing that I'm proud about is there's ramifications from surrounding yourself with these types of files.
hmm
You pay the price for it, but it is worth it. I am really, really proud of how many young people are alive and doing well because of the work that I did.
Awesome. Great. See, it was a tough question, but such a
Oh.
great answer. So before we let you go, so you could do some more great work out there, maybe even write your second book, who the hell knows? Yeah, before we let you go, how can people out there, Canada, US, anywhere in the world, find a Jennifer Highland out there, whether they want to just simply consume the book, come and have you come out and speak, whatever it is, how could they best find a Jen Highland out there?
So the best way to find Jen Highland is I have an author website. So it's jenhighland.com, JENNHYLAND.com. And on the author website is a way of connecting with me directly. I'm also on LinkedIn and I am on Instagram. I don't really understand how to use Instagram properly, but when
I
people
don't
message,
either, so
all
don't feel
right, it's
bad.
kind
Yeah,
of
I
like
know.
weird. I don't know.
I
And so on my website, it connects right through to my email and LinkedIn. And so the book is easy to find. It's not just on Amazon, but like Barnes and Noble, Chapters, Indigo. You
Mhm.
can order it online. The bookstores that it's on the shelf in are really just in the Vancouver area. It's in the bookstores here, but I'm reachable through various venues and I love engaging with people. So the opportunity to speak, not just with law enforcement, but just other groups. I really relish like the interaction with human beings. And so, I'm easy to find. I'm easy to reach.
Yes, I can definitely attest to that. Jen is very easy to find and very easy to reach. And you know what? She'll even come early for the interview. Jen, it was an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Really love what you're doing, and thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, and thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio, and we'll be back with you next week with another great guest.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by Bader Training and Consulting. Public Safety Talk Radio is also proud to be a part of the growing National Police Podcast Network. The National Police Podcast Network is a dedicated media network powered by the National Police Federal Credit Union, developed in partnership with experienced podcast professionals and public safety advocates. Learn more about the National Police Federal Credit Union at nationalpolicefcu.com.